There we go. Welcome everyone to this cert-manager bi-weekly development meeting on the 25th of August 2021. We are joined by Param from Amazon and a colleague of hers called Brandy. Welcome to you both. The rest of us are familiar jet stackers, so we don't need introductions. The only person who we haven't met yet is Brandy, so perhaps you introduce yourself. We can't hear you.
All right, how about now?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice to meet you, everyone. My name is Brandy Kinlaw. I am software development manager at AWS. My team is going to be taking over all of the development efforts for the PCA Issuer plugin that's hosted in the cert-manager repo. I'm here. Eventually, we will have a few of our other team members join so that we, have a good presence, and you guys get to know the other engineers that are working on the plugin. So happy to meet you all.
Thanks. And we'll discuss in a moment some of your issues with the CI for that plugin.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So if I share my screen, I'll share my browser. Let's see if I can do that. Oh, I'm going to turn off Slack before I do that. In fact, I'm not logged on to Slack, so that's good news. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Anyone not see it? I'll take that as a success. So the first item on the agenda is one that Ashley has written up, or one that Ashley wants to talk about, which is about software signing. So I'll hand over to Ashley to introduce that topic.
Sure. So I only threw this in just because it was mentioned almost offhand in the stand-up that it might be a good thing to discuss in this meeting. I don't actually, I'm not sure if anything about what we've discussed in the signing sphere so far has been controversial, or if anyone has any specific doubts, but I literally just threw this in because the agenda was empty and because someone had mentioned it offhand. Certainly, if anyone has any questions about it, or if I can explain anything or talk about anything, I'm happy to do that.
I think we've only discussed it internally, so maybe just a quick summary of what you think we would start by doing, just because to go on the open source record.
Yeah, I think that's valuable. So this is the link, which hopefully everyone can see. I'm not sure if that's a finished document, I would say, but it's most of the stuff that's in there is good to go to kind of describe the initial approach that is being proposed for code signing. So the sort of main features of it are focusing on trying to only have one key for signing everything, if that's at all possible, which at least for now seems very much doable. So because the rest of our infrastructure is in GCP, the key we could create a KMS key in GCP. Then I'm working on a shim to allow Helm's signing code to use that KMS key, which isn't actually too much code. And the idea in the document is also to use cosign, which can natively sign using KMS for signing containers and other things potentially in the future. So other candidates would include YAML manifests that we distribute, or SHA-256 hashes of our various kind plugins for different platforms. Basically, anything that we produce that anyone might consume is probably a thing that could be signed. And like I say, so far it seems possible to have just the one key that we can do all of it with, which would be ideal because then it solves the problem of us having to manage where that private key lives, having to have a way of us getting access to it, and it prevents anyone from being able to save it onto their machine, have it available to them in the future. Which that solves the sort of joiners, movers, leavers problem for cert-manager maintainers. You can't take the key now and keep it around forever. I guess that's the overview.
So does that mean you have to have a Google account in the JetStack organization for KMS, or can you add arbitrary people?
So I haven't actually looked too much into the access controls for the key yet. I suspect you'll be able to allow anyone, you'll be able to like allow list people to use it. Certainly that's how like AWS's version works, and I'll admit I just kind of assume that GCP would be similar. At the moment, the build process does require that you be at JetStack, as far as I recall. We know that on our release process. So at least we're not making it any worse than that. Ideally, like full-blown community members outside of JetStack should be able to do the same thing. But given there is an obvious candidate for anyone at the moment who would want to do that, I've not rushed to solve that. We've discussed before about maybe moving the infrastructure, or being able to move the infrastructure into an outside account or a different cloud or anything. I don't think there's anything in this process that would stop that. The downside, I suppose, would be that it would be an observable thing for end users if we moved clouds, because we couldn't necessarily take the key with us. So since we'll be publicly distributing the public key from that KMS key we'd be using for signing, if we wanted to move entirely to, say, AWS or to a different Google project or whatever, the key would change, or we'd have to come up with some fancy shim to use the key from a different cloud or whatever. Again, I'm not particularly bothered by that. Like, people need, like, if you squint at it, then it's good that people will be forced to make sure they can change keys. But I don't think that's particularly likely to happen, and probably we could find a way to shim it so we could just keep on using the same key. It doesn't concern me overly.
And if the key was somehow compromised, what would we do? What would be our response? How would we rotate the key or change it and re-sign all of the packages if necessary?
So there'd have to be some support for signing things using CMREL, which is where a lot of the signing logic will end up being, because that's where the release process is. So that should be able to handle the re-signing bit. I imagine the first thing I would do on a compromise would be to do an @here in cert-manager on Kubernetes Slack and say, oh my God, please change your key, or at least don't trust the old one. Like it's not the end of the world scenario if it is compromised, because I mean, at the moment nobody's checking it because there's nothing signed. So like you just go back to today rather than the Stone Ages. To actually be able to attack anything after having stolen the key would require that you man in the middle someone effectively, or that they be using a malicious mirror or something, which would have probably manifested in a bad situation beforehand.
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, maybe you have. Maybe we spent some time thinking about what's the term for it? There's an attack scenario. Maybe we write a couple of paragraphs. What's the word?
A threat model.
Threat model, yeah.
Yeah,
Write something about how, if the key was leaked somehow, what would the person in possession of that leaked key have to do to cause a compromised version of cert-manager to be installed on a cluster in a bank or something like that?
Yeah, I've hinted at that a little bit in this document. He says as Google Docs takes a while to load. In this document, which is the project spec, and sort of talk about why someone would want to sign. It's not an explicit threat model, but it has the sort of the motivation for wanting to do it in the first place. But yeah, I think having explicit threat models for cert-manager would actually be a super cool thing. Generally, like the various different bits and how they can go wrong, if such a thing doesn't already exist.
Does it work in a way that, say, if someone compromises the key, then it means that, like, say, a user already trusted that key. So if someone compromises it, they can sign not just cert-manager, but any other software that the user would install and verify against their set of keys.
So
I don't know. I mean, that's probably not the way how people do it, but if they did it that way, then
unfortunately, outside of this meeting, I've said before that Helm's signing is less than ideal, and part of the reason that it's less than ideal is that it uses GPG, which itself is less than ideal. So Helm does require that you import the GPG key locally and have it in your keyring to be able to verify with, because that's what Helm is doing. So Helm doesn't have that restriction on it, or at least I don't think it does. So potentially, yeah, it could be a risk to someone elsewhere. I'm not saying it necessarily would be guaranteed, but with Helm, I'd be scared. With Cosign or Connoisseur, I'm not actually sure if the key. I assume, given that it's made recently, that it would have a key tied to a project rather than a key trusted globally, because that's the design that makes sense if you're not using GPG.
Hey Ashley, this is Param. I had a couple of questions for this one. So number one is sorry, I have not gone through the doc, and if I'm covering something which is already covered, but I was thinking, do you have a story around key rotation at a cadence, like you're rotating your keys every 30 days? And part two of it is like, is it going to be a forward secrecy compatible? Like if you get hold of any of the older keys which are decommissioned, you will not be able to do any damage. So I think those two things will be interesting things to consider.
So as of today, I've not addressed key rotation at all. A lot of places that use signing keys don't bother. Partly the reason I've not addressed it at all is that if we end up using Cosign successfully, part of the SigStore project, they have a project they're working on called Fulcio, I think it's called, maybe butchering the pronunciation, which will generate temporary ephemeral signing keys based off a root CA they control. And if we could move to using that, we don't need to worry about having a key at all. Like if we can sign our Helm charts using that and just define our own path for verifying stuff. As far as forward secrecy goes, or I guess like forward safety with signing more than secrecy, that's kind of just a risk of all signing. Like ultimately, it's the verifier that's at risk there. If they still trust an old key, then they're there's not much we can do. Like certainly there's no concept of like revocation that I've considered, and if I were to think about it, I don't think it would be worth us worrying about like providing a way by which we could revoke the cert, especially if we end up for like the Helm use case where we're having to sort of do a GPG shim. Like that GPG is a nightmare, and there's no way that like that's going to be a user experience that anyone's going to want to go through to.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. Yeah, I think that you raised an interesting point where you talked about having a root CA which kinds of sign, like a bless is a code signing certificate, and that contains your public key, and then you can later revoke that code signing cert. So you are kind of doing like a modified OCSP stapling where you're saying like, this certificate is revoked, so don't trust these keys. So now it's up to the client to reject those certificates, because in the end, it's always up to the clients. They can always fail open, even if the certificate is revoked. That's a separate story. Yeah.
Yeah, and another of the advantages of Fulcio, if that's indeed how you say Fulcio, is that it has sort of certificate transparency built in as well, which makes it even easier for people to do the right thing and have well, at least they have the public record of what's been signed by whom, and we can see if something's compromised. They can see if something's compromised. It's all in the open. certificate transparency is probably one of the best things to happen to the internet in years and years, and having that for signing would be awesome. But that's all of that stuff is kind of like alpha v0001. So I'm not touching any of that with a barge pole yet, but down the road it could improve.
Makes sense.
When I'm trying to think of, I don't know much about this, but the example that comes to my mind is the G-Cloud CLI, which I install on my laptop using a Debian package repository. No, sorry, an RPM package repository. Well, would that be an option? I mean, I'm just trying to think of what I'm trying to gather my thoughts. But how do people check the signatures of other software? I mean, it seems to me the one that I do know is used widely is the Debian packaging and the RPM packaging system. So could we consider those?
Apton, yeah, we certainly could package those. I'm not sure many would use them really, because it's not really how you. Certainly for the crew plugins, it would make sense to have RPMs and debs flowing about. For cert-manager itself, I don't really know why you would install like the controller binary that way. The way they do it is very much the same. The sort of repository manifests assigned, and they all inevitably use GPG, but they're trying to modernize. Again, that they use GPG because they were originally built in the 90s, and that was what you used then. Helm has got no excuse really, because it wasn't built in the 90s and they should have known better. But yeah, they're trying to change it. So like I know there's efforts to move apt over to use Minisign instead. I'd much rather use Minisign, but if, at the end of the day, Helm isn't going to allow that, and Cosign is more like tailored for our use case.
Any further remarks from anyone? And if not, perhaps we should move on to the next item in the agenda, which is Param. You're going to discuss those things you told us about at the beginning of the meeting, CI for the Amazon CA plugin for cert-manager. Over to you.
Sure. So just to provide context, so I guess last month we were working on onboarding the ACM private CA connector integration tests to run as part of cert-manager Prow cluster. So that will be a single place of running the test cases for other cert-manager project and cert-manager itself, if, for example, for the external issuers. So the one thing I wanted to check was like, if are those test cases already running? And if there are some test results which are being published somewhere where we can look at those test results. So every time a pull request comes and we mark it as, good to go with the label. So it will be good to see that all those test cases passed. So we recently had an auth issue where IRSA was broken because of AWS SDK v2 upgrade. So we're trying to figure out a better process where integration tests are actually running on every PR. That we can check. And of course, we're going to improve our integration testing to make sure like we cover different auth scenarios like ARSA, KIM, or our usual AWS roles, the way we do it with EKS.
I don't know. Urbe, do you know, are those CI test results showing up in test grid or anything like that?
I don't see any. I don't currently see that we have any pre-submits for this project in testing repo. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. You're not wrong. So basically, if you want reports from tests to be on PRs, then we can add a job to the pre-submits in JetStack testing. So I think pretty sure this repo is open. So all of our job config is in this repository. The notes.
think Param already created an issue against this repo. It's just that we never actually implemented it, right?
Yeah. So I mean, you have scripts that run tests in the AWS PCA issuer repository, right?
We do. So we have end-to-end tests running on a kind cluster, which creates sample certificates and creates a private CA. So I guess that was another thing, because I wanted to make sure that AWS credits are still valid. And if we need to extend, that's actually part 2 of the conversation, because we talked about if cert-manager moves under CNCF, and CNCF has a different process of getting AWS credits. So we have a completely different team for doing that. So I guess we need to figure out like how frequently those CI tests are running, and where are with the credits, and what needs to be done on the AWS side to make sure we are good to go.
Yeah. So I think the reporting from the Frau jobs is in like JUnit config, which is really irritating, I guess, if you want to report. I'm not 100% sure how we would generate that. We'll probably have to change the scripts. As for the moving under the CNCF, we've been at the last step for ages, and it's with Matt Bates, our CTO. And this was what we were. So this is the other thing we were talking about internally, was using the CNCFs. So they have a way of leasing a AWS account and then running your test and then wiping at the end, because the CNCF has special AWS accounts for running testing.
So that's right. So I guess until that last part is done, we can make sure from our side the account ID that you shared last time will have enough credits to run the test cases. Yep. So I'll keep an eye on that on our side. But yeah, I think it will be super helpful to see the test results for every PR.
Yeah, so I think we'd have to make sure that your tests generate some kind of JUnit report, because that's how the test results get reported in Perl. It reads something that's outputted by Ginkgo currently, which is a JUnit XML file of some sort. I've not really looked closely at it. So if we can generate that, then we can add it to the cert-manager pre-submits, which means that whenever there's a pull request, it will run the test and generate the report.
I see. And the report will be generated like right next to the pull request, the way it's running make run. So I think we are running unit tests as of now on every pull request to make sure like our unit tests are green. So I guess at the same time, it will be a process which will be automatic. Sorry, I have never worked with Prow before and how it's linked with GitHub. So the reason I'm asking this question.
Yeah, so Prow is watching all of the repositories in the cert-manager org. So we can just add a pre-submit job for the PCA issuer explicitly that runs a test and generates a report, and then the report goes in a dashboard. Yep.
I wasn't paying total attention, but so I looked at a pull request in the private CA repository, and I see that there are some test results for linting and unit tests already. They're from GitHub Actions. And then I looked at the end-to-end tests, which seem to be in this script.
Yep.
This is not a Ginkgo test suite. Does that, Jake, what you were talking about was outputting JUnit style results so that they can be shown clearly in a Prow report.
Yeah.
Are we saying that the end-to-end test, are we going to recommend that the end-to-end test suite is rewritten that way? Or?
I haven't recommended anything, but yeah, you can either generate your own JUnit format, or you can because Ginkgo is behavior-driven test, you can basically read your shell script top to bottom and then rewrite it in Ginkgo, and then it would do it all for you.
I mean, could these end-to-end tests run in GitHub Actions? Does it need to be? Does it need to use Prow? So this looks quite similar to the tests I wrote for the sample external issuer, whose tests are run in GitHub Actions. Is that an option to use GitHub Actions for the end-to-end tests?
I think, Richard, that's actually interesting. So these tests are creating a ACM private CA, which is a resource in AWS. So technically, you need AWS credentials to run these test cases. So we cannot check in the cred information, of course, to the GitHub repo. So if, as part of GitHub Actions, we'll have to figure out, like, how do we pass in these parameters which are not visible to the outside world? Yeah.
It is possible. I mean, it is possible to provide secrets. Whether they're secret enough, you'll have to judge for yourself. Has anyone got any thoughts?
They should be secret enough. If you set them as a secret on the repo, they're not actually visible. Like a GitHub repository secret.
When I wrote the... Go ahead, sorry.
I thought that I heard that one of the benefits of being in this cert-manager Prow cluster was that we, I guess our plugin would be run against newer versions of cert-manager. So, you know, if you guys release a beta or something that our plugin doesn't work well with, we would be notified prior to release. Would we be able to still do that? I don't know if that's true, first of all, but would we still be able to do that if we use GitHub Actions?
It's not something that you get for free just because you switch to Prow, as far as I know. It'd be something you'd have to integrate into your end-to-end tests. Perhaps you parameterize the version of cert-manager that gets installed, and then in the GitHub Actions, I think you can have a matrix of tests, can you? And you can say, run these tests for all these different versions of cert-manager.
Okay.
So basically, as part of our own end-to-end tests, we install an external issuer, which at the moment is our sample external issuer, which is just the template one. And we test that cert-manager works with an external issuer.
Yeah.
So that might be what you had seen.
Okay.
And Jack, I guess that was our original plan, right? Like, we wanted to run ACM privacy issuer with cert-manager the way external issuer test cases are running. So that, for example, if cert-manager gets a new pull request, it's still running all the integration tests. And that will also run the integration test of this plugin. So I thought that's where we were going when we talked about CI.
Yeah, my hunch is that that's not necessary, but we can certainly talk about it. I think we would be nervous about adding the private CA issuer to the cert-manager end-to-end tests because it's already so complicated and there's already so much to go wrong. It does go wrong quite often. So I think our thinking was that if we can demonstrate in our end-to-end tests that an external issuer does work, that we're demonstrating that the external issuer API is usable, then the individual external issuers can perform their own tests to ensure that they're compatible with various versions of cert-manager.
I see.
That's my thought.
Yeah, I think like the cert-manager end-to-end tests are run on pull requests on the cert-manager repo. I think in this case, we particularly want to run it on pull requests to the PCA issuer repo. So...
But I mean, it's not. It's a good idea. It would be a good idea if we had we had periodic cert-manager tests running that somehow ran the test suites of all of the external issuers that we list on our website. That might be another way to do it, but I just don't think we'd do it for every pull request in cert-manager.
I see. So that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, there might actually be.
We can help out as well. If you have any problems getting this working, I remember it being quite difficult to get kind clusters working in GitHub Actions, so we can certainly help out with that if you ping us on Slack.
Sure, absolutely. And I guess that's another interesting thing. We are also looking at adding additional test cases to start up a EKS cluster. So our original thought was if we do kind, it should work with EKS. And like that kind is more broader than EKS based on the Kubernetes build they use. But now after the last bug that we found, we are also thinking that we're going to integrate EKS test cases in this end-to-end step where it first creates kind, run all the test cases, then it creates an EKS cluster and then run all the test cases again.
Yeah, we just had a summer of code student that did it that ran the cert-manager end-to-end tests on EKS instead of on kind, and did highlight some issues. So it is a good idea, and we have a periodic job in Prowl now testing AWS. So yeah, it is different. That's definitely a good idea, because Kubernetes is it is universal, but it's also each cloud provider is slightly different.
Okay. Any other remarks on that topic?
So what do we want to come away from this meeting going away to do? So should we, on the cert-manager side, think about conformance tests for all the external issuers that we link, running like maybe every week or something, running against all the external issuers that we list on our website?
That maybe we should be a bit broader than that. What we haven't done yet is document the conformance requirements, have we? We've talked about documenting that for an external issuer to be listed on the cert-manager IO website, it should have met these certain requirements. And I don't think we have yet written those down. That's my thought.
But
to write it down first.
If we were to do that, then like what value would that, like say for an issuer X, they fail, what do we do? What would be like the point of doing that? Would we tell someone that this is non-conformant? Would we like raise an issue against this repository? Would we actually dig into it? Or would it just be like out of curiosity?
I think it would well, I don't know, I'm making it up on the spot, but I think if it wasn't fixed within a certain number of releases, then we would remove it from the documentation as a not known to be working external issuer.
And we can be proactive as well. Like when in cert-manager 1.3, we added the ability to like approve and deny certificate requests, and we went and made a PR on every external issuer that was on our website saying that this behavior is new in cert-manager 1.3, and you need to be aware of it. Like we can be proactive.
Jake, I was thinking like there is another way to maybe limit the scope in here. So we can start with what external issuers are already part of cert-manager repo. And there is already a conformance criteria defined for donating external issuers to cert-manager. So maybe we start with that. So as new issuers start coming under cert-manager repo, that's when we start running their integration tests. That's another approach.
But continuing about that, like we may not, I mean, there's, for example, like Active Directory certificate issuer. Would we really spin up infra to use this issuer? Like, would we only do it for once? That, yeah, it's a bit theoretical, I guess.
So what I don't know what the outcome what's the what action points can we add to the agenda?
I think we should consider what a conformance test for external issuers looks like.
Right.
That is actually something actionable.
And I don't see why by next development meeting we couldn't, with our help, Param and Brandy, you could have got your current end-to-end tests running in some shape or form in GitHub Actions. That would be my that would be a goal I would set.
That's fair. And I guess on our side, we also have to figure out, like you said, the Ginkgo and the JUnit configuration so that the reports can be published. I think that's probably another action item on the AWS side.
If you want to integrate with RHEL, it will have to generate some kind of JUnit test. But you can also consider if you want to integrate with Pro at all.
Yeah, what do we mean by published? I mean, is it like it could be a green badge on the README file of the project stating the current CI status?
Yeah, right. On our side, we usually use S3. We publish our results on our S3 bucket. But I guess at least what we were looking for was like every time a pull request comes in and it's at a point where the unit tests have already ran, we could show publicly like this is the CI test, integration test, the end-to-end test where we created a EKS cluster or a kind cluster. And these were the issues that were raised so that whosoever submitted a pull request can look at those issues and automatically respond to those. So that's the intention.
Yeah, and I think if you did it with GitHub Actions, those would be you could arrange for those to be listed here, and it would be quite clear. It's not great. The GitHub Actions reporting, in my limited experience, isn't very clear, but it does give you something.
So is the recommendation that we should not onboard with cert-manager cloud cluster, and we just should go the route of GitHub Actions, or we want to do both?
My recommendation is to use GitHub Actions, but you'd have to. What do the others think? I just think Prow it just adds extra complication.
Yeah, because there's something else wrong with our Prow cluster that we haven't put the time in to work out. Whereas sometimes it just fails to launch things, which leads to erroneous red tests. So it's slightly irritating, and you might get alerted when you didn't want it.
I see.
On the other hand, I mean, the idea of a test grid, like you see, this what I'm showing on my screen now. This is what we look at, and it's pretty depressing to look at sometimes. But it would be nice to see an overview of all of the cert-manager projects here in this dashboard, and this test grid system is very closely dependent on Prow, I think, but I'm not totally sure of that. And of course, all this needs moving because it shouldn't be under JetStack. It should be under the cert-manager organization.
It's difficult for us to move it because this actually isn't completely open source. You need to have someone who can approve your changes who is on the Kubernetes release team.
Okay.
So James set this all up when he was close to the release team, I think.
Right.
But all of this is not anything to do with the CNCF. Well, it is, but we don't have any control over it.
Right.
So it's
something like this though would be useful.
Yeah, we could have our own one.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. So just maybe a little bit unrelated question. So do you have test cases for all the supported Kubernetes versions and, for example, IRSA or KIM or other authentication mechanism with different cloud providers? Because that's something we are trying to look on our side, like how detailed the tests that we are writing for this plugin needs to be, and what all scenarios it needs to cover. Because I saw a GitHub issue a few days ago. I believe they mentioned that Kubernetes 1.16 is no longer supported by the AWS Private CA Azure plugin. So we didn't have a test bed where we would download different versions of Kubernetes or different versions of cert managers. Or even, for example, KIM stopped working as soon as AWS SDK v2 was released because there was a different way of processing header information And AWS SDK v2 does not allow header information to be passed in anymore for proxy headers, I believe. That was the attribute. And it broke KIM. So I guess the question I was trying to get at was like, how do you scope the test cases to make sure that all major items are covered with every release?
So we end-to-end test on every version that we say we support of Kubernetes, but we only use kind. So we use the 116 image and the 117 image and the 118 image all the way up to 122 because that's what we say we support. But only our own end-to-end tests. We don't test the external issuers.
What do
on
you do
every
in the
version.
CAS issuer, Jake? Do you have any tests for different versions of Kubernetes there?
No, but the CAS issuer also doesn't explicitly say what versions of Kubernetes it supports.
Right, right.
So yeah,
I think that's the tricky part.
I mean, perhaps one thing we could do is update the sample external issuer CI to demonstrate how you might run its tests on multiple versions of Kubernetes. I don't know about testing on EKS and things like that, but we could do that. That might be helpful to you and to other external issuer providers.
Yep, that sounds great.
We could figure out how to present the results nicely in GitHub. Whether we'll be able to do it in the next couple of weeks, I'm not sure. But that seems like a useful thing for us to do.
So yeah, we should define our I wrote it down. We should consider what our performance test looks like. Update the external issuer to actually look like it runs a performance test on different versions of Kubernetes, and then make it a template for other people to follow.
And even better than a template would be a library, wouldn't it, Jake? Like if each external issuer could import the cert-manager end-to-end test builder or something like that, that would be quite cool.
Yeah, that's a great idea because I think the API nomenclature is already defined, like what input and what output is expected. It's going to get a CSR. It's going to return back a certificate eventually. How that whole process happens is different for every cloud provider. But once we have that input and output defined, what you're giving as an input and what you're expecting as an output matches on different Kubernetes version, that's eventually it's going to get down to.
Yeah, it sounds quite doable, doesn't it?
Well, okay, now I'm just thinking about how much time we can dedicate to it, and how much time can you dedicate to it on each side, on your side. Is AWS willing to help with these conformance tests for the sample external issuer, which would then become the template or library for all external issuers? Maybe it's a question for Brandy, I don't know.
So not right away, we wouldn't be able to support because we're trying to get the plugin in a better state. But yeah, we definitely could help.
Just keep it in mind. Whatever you do, you'll be implementing this in stages. But if you keep that at the back of your mind, that the code you write, if you could write it in such a way that it's portable and usable for other external issuers, that it might lead to good things.
And I think as a good start, as we write these test cases on our side, we can even have link, here is one of the issuer who has done this. So that could even be a start. Maybe we don't do it in the sample external issuer package, but if we get it up and working in AWS private CA issuer package, that could be a good start as well.
Okay, well, I think I'll draw a close to that item on the agenda. And all I wanted to add, an item I added to the agenda was following on from a discussion I had with James Westby in my one-to-one this week. I think we're doing too many patch releases. I want to ask the question, do we always need to do a patch release after we've fixed a bug that someone has identified, that someone has reported in the last release? Should we consider batching them up and releasing them slightly less frequently to reduce our workload, because the release process at the moment is so tedious, but also to avoid overwhelming our users with like many patch releases within a few weeks. I could imagine many of our users will not look carefully at the release notes and won't consider whether this patch release actually is necessary for them, and they'll just grumble at the constant work they have to do to keep cert-manager up to date. That's my proposition. What do you think?
I think it feels worse for the ones that were just done, because they every time we'd released a new release, we discovered a new thing just by bad luck when it comes to the actual things we discovered. And at least for a couple of these, I don't think we could have waited. Like the one with, I'm just looking at them to make sure I refer to the right one. The 151 with the mistakenly changed CRDs. They're that's like the kind of thing where you can't wait, because like every time someone installs the wrong CRDs, it just gets worse and worse. Like more people will have the wrong thing. Like without a fixed version being available, it just gets worse. So like that one at least was we had to immediately release that. We couldn't really wait with it, and then we discovered new stuff right afterwards, and then again. So for me, I personally, I'm not too concerned. I think it's just bad luck more than anything.
I guess I thought the same as you, Ash, about that backwards incompatible change. But then you could argue that as long as we pin the issue to the GitHub board and make it very clear that this is a known issue, and advise people for the time being not to upgrade, and advise people that the workaround is to change their manifests to use the V1 API, that would have been sufficient. If that we could have used that as an excuse for at least a couple of, maybe for a week, in which time we would have probably encountered all the other bugs, and we could have done one patch release rather than 3 at the moment. And maybe we just, it's kind of inevitable, isn't it, that after a new minor release that there will be teething troubles. So perhaps we should just expect there to be bug reports and say that we'll do this minor release, and a week later, if there are any semi-important issues, we'll release a patch release.
I would have thought that we just need to aim at like automating the release process. And I don't think there's that much burden on users to, like, I don't think anyone is regularly monitoring the releases. And I feel like if you had to monitor whether there is a known bug that has been announced but hasn't been fixed, like that's not much different from upgrading to a newer patch release as well.
Yeah. Automate. Yeah, I mean, it's the thing that I think the reason I brought this up was because the release process is so tedious and long-winded. To do it properly, I mean, it's pretty easy actually to do the release. It's all of the documentation changes and the rest of it. And
OLM and Google Marketplace also. The other releases like OLM and Google Marketplace that you have to do afterwards.
Yeah. Well, anyway, that was what I wanted to discuss. Maybe what I do want to do is go and look and see if Kubernetes have any written policy on this. Do they explain under what circumstances they will do a patch release? And perhaps we could, as usual, copy what they've written and adapt it and write down, if it's not already, write down the circumstances when we'll do a patch release. Mail, you may have done that already. I can't remember.
I can't remember. Release notes?
Releases.
Supported releases, maybe. I think I remember changing it like 1 month ago with and Ashley reviewed my PR because like I had written that we would bundle the patches together, but then we started just releasing immediately. So I removed, as you can see, some of the diagrams are gone now because we don't bundle patches together anymore. We just patch it immediately. And like all the bugs are critical right now, which is fine. I think it's fine. I think it's good.
Yeah, I guess it's just like I'm conscious of the time. It's like the ultimate perverse incentive if we have a fix for something available and we're not releasing it for our sake. Like we all know that the solution is to have a better release process, faster release process. Obviously, it seems clear to me that it's ideal that if a fix is available, it's released so people can use it. I'm just not concerned, I guess. I just like we know what the happy path is here.
Yeah, improve the release process.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it's a lot of work.
Well, so we should figure out what's the lowest hanging fruit. What's the thing we could do that makes the release process? What's the most useful thing we could do to improve the release process?
I think collecting the commands together in CMRL. So like I think I said it in the start this morning. If we have like CMRL patch release, and it will just do everything, generate a new patch release. So it becomes like the cognitive load for doing a release becomes type that command, then go away for an hour and come back and see if it did anything.
Oh, wait, I did something today. Now you have a progress bar that tells you how many minutes are left for the stage. It's stupid, but I thought
that is useful.
Yeah, just.
I would like if there was something that would just generate, like stage the artifacts every day, like look at something that, all the generate artifacts, check that for those artifacts, I don't know, checking in whatever way by signature, etc. All the end-to-end tests for all the Kubernetes versions have passed for that particular version, and then just, stage that thing, and then we can release it if we want to, if there's a need. So there isn't a...
That is a good idea. Yeah. So that we could automatically, am I understanding correctly? We could automatically run CMRL stage on every time something gets merged to a release branch. What would the version be? I don't know. Does that?
I didn't necessarily think on the every pull request that gets merged. I was thinking it'd be nice to stage a new version that has passed all the end-to-end tests, not just once we run our pull request. But I think in any case, it would be good to have staged artifacts ready without human having to wait for them to get staged, because we already build stuff in CI all the time in different tests.
Okay, well, we're 5 minutes over time. I will continue thinking about that and talk about the ideas for releasing the improving the release process in another meeting. Okay, any other items to discuss? And if not, I shall stop the video. Say thanks, everyone.